Right. Yeah. Thank you. And good afternoon or night, evening, everybody. The goal today is to give a, let's say, basic intermediate understanding of Azure Virtual Desktop. Um, there you go. Yeah. My name is David Nudelman. I am currently running Ventag, the Vancouver Technology User Group. We started as a Windows NT user group and evolved over the years, and we mostly cover Microsoft technologies, but a lot of the security stack as well. I also run the Workplace Ninjas Canada user group, so planting seeds of similar user groups in different cities here in Canada. So we were in Toronto last week, and we found two good candidates to continue of the Workplace Ninjas Toronto, and we're going to Calgary in September. So trying to expand more kind of a cloud user group focused on the infrastructure IT admin side. I'm a director at Steves and Associates, which is a Microsoft partner. I'm also a 7-time Microsoft MVP. And my day-to-day work, I'm a cloud adoption strategist, so helping organizations roadmap, understand where they are, where they want to be, understanding what's out there, and how they can adopt the cloud and the necessary steps to get there. But the goal today is to talk about Azure Virtual Desktop. So I always like to start everything with context, so understanding the history of what led to Azure Virtual Desktop is always interesting. So our story starts with the human-machine connection and our growing dependency of a computer to get things done. I always compare it now to AI, and our increased dependency of getting AI to accelerate the amount of work. The same way AI is a tool, the same way calculator is a tool that allows you to do equations and calculations faster. That's how I compare it to AI. But computer is again in a similar spot. It's a tool that allows us to be a lot more productive. And with that need, there was the initial desire of people say, hey, I have a computer at a remote location, right? For example, at work, and I want to do some work at night when I'm at home. Can I connect to that machine? So that's when a remote desktop connection started being a thing, and that allows us to either internally on the network, remote to another machine to perform administration duties, or if you're working from home and you want to connect to your powerful machine at work because it has the necessary software or has specialized hardware like graphics accelerators, that was the way to go. You would publish a port on the firewall, and it would use your internet and the protocol to connect to your device. That need and desire evolved over time, and more people wanted to leverage that. So Microsoft came up with remote desktop services or terminal servers, where the initial name, and that evolved the infrastructure a little bit, since the goal was to provide a multitude of, let's say, sessions for people to connect to. So they were no longer connecting to their physical desktop at work. You were enabling a platform with multiple available sessions for people to connect to. And again, the process would be the same. From the end user, there will be almost no difference between a direct remote connection to a machine. You use a remote desktop connection client, on your device, you use the internet, you had an address that was given to you, you would be asked to put your username and password, and you would get a session. The architecture behind remote desktop services is you have a connection broker, a gateway, a licensing server. You can also access it through a web browser, and then you have session hosts. So that's kind of all the infrastructure to be able to serve people different machines, and there's some supporting infrastructure, such as database, file servers, depending on how you do profile management. There might be FS logics or something similar on the background. And this has been widely deployed. Most organizations in the world had remote desktop services in some kind. But remote desktop services was always about connecting users to a server session. So you had a Windows server being split up into sessions, and people were connecting to sessions on Windows Server. The limitations on that is there's a lot of software implications. So there's quite a wide variety of software that will not run on servers. And similarly, the user experience on a shared server might not be the greatest. So we started hearing the term VDI, Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. So that's where, again, you could come in from a desktop, thin client, even your phone. You would have an agent or your tablet. You would have a application, remote desktop services, or a specific per vendor. You would connect to a broker, right? Kind of like a VMware View Manager. And you would have the same way you had on RDS, session hosts with different hosts. The main difference between RDS and a virtual desktop infrastructure on the traditional sense is that for VDI, you would have kind of a Windows client instead of Windows Server, and each user would get a full machine. And they could have been a pooled machine, so generic or pre-imaged machines with the software you need, but on a generic pool that every time you connect, you might get the same or a different one. And there was also VDI dedicated, where you would have your own machine, and every time you connect, you get the same machine. And that was very popularized by VMware and Citrix, but you also had the Microsoft VDI option as well as part of the remote desktop services. So that's everything that existed before AVD was introduced. So now we get to Azure Virtual Desktops. So the Azure Virtual Desktop architecture can be very simple, but it can also get very complex. So I didn't cover all the infrastructure aspects of VDI and RDS. They're effectively the same. But the good thing with Azure Virtual Desktop, it's leveraging Azure and potentially all its integrations. So you could have Azure Active Directory or even on-premise Active Directory, have the normal Entra ID hybrid identities. Then you have a Azure Virtual Desktop control plane, so web access, gateway, broker, everything you had on RDS. Some of those elements you will manage and control. And the biggest difference between RDS and AVD is some of those components, namely the ones that are harder to maintain and scale, are actually managed by Azure or Microsoft. So the more complicated areas to allow access to those resources is very scalable, very robust, and managed by Microsoft. So it's an easier implementation and easier to scale. I configured the AVD environment that I'll be demonstrating here in less than 3 hours, including creating a physical domain controller, doing the Entra ID sync for identity. So, and creating the FS Logics profile containers. So it can be a very quick and simple implementation if you're already familiar with Azure. I'm not saying that every implementation of AVD should take a very small amount of time. As with any RDS VDI solution, you should have some image engineering, make sure the image is appropriate, make sure all the applications are there, all the connections to the applications people will be working are in place. So you need to do all the prep work. But even though it can be complex, getting something, a pilot or proof of concept done, is quite a simple task. So once you have your identity in place, be it just Entra ID or a hybrid identity with Active Directory, you would need on Azure at least a very basic landing zone, right? Landing zone is what we call a preparation of Azure as a data center ready to use. So my view is Azure should be considered not just another machine that you have in the cloud. It's a whole data center you have in the cloud. So before you start using Azure, you should go through an Azure landing zone exercise where you prepare Azure to be used the same way you would in a traditional data center, right? You configure your networks, make sure there's a connection between your Azure network and your premise network, make sure there's no IP conflict. So the IP schema should be an extension of what you have, not the same. So you can't have on-premise and physical machines on the same, VLAN or IP range. So you need to be aware of those things. Same way when you start provisioning machines on Azure, there's every single model, every single version. Through a landing zone exercise, you can narrow down, say, hey, by default, I want this model of machine and those two others should be available. Then you can start doing some role-based access control. So your networking security team can manage network and security settings on Azure, while your end user team can manage identities and applications, and so on. So you should really consider anything you do on Azure, as in I am adopting a new data center, and take it seriously, right? Don't just start spinning up resources because you can quickly become an insecure implementation and it can be hard to control cost. You can see here there's a subscription one. So it's recommended, for example, that Azure Virtual Desktop be on its own subscription that encapsulates a lot of role-based access management control. You can also monitor the costs of AVD specifically separately. So there's multiple advantages of using multiple subscriptions on Azure. So once you have all those dependencies in place and you have a landing zone configured, so with a landing zone, I would expect it to have the identity synchronized, a way to connect AVD to your on-premise networks or other clouds if you're using other clouds. And I would also expect you to have the network configured. Once you have the network, some storage, and the connections to your on-premise Active Directory and the applications you need users to access, then you can create your first host pool. Azure Virtual Desktop has as a main benefit the areas where Microsoft is managing it for you. So diagnostics, gateway, some of the management, the broker, load balancing, they're providing networking, storage, and compute that you have some configuration over it, but they're all provided by Microsoft. On an RDS environment, a remote desktop services and VDI infrastructure, always the gateway and the broker are, let's say, the most complex areas to also configure initially and maintain, right? You need certificates, you need to make sure there's good internet connectivity, you need to load balance it well. The advantage of virtual desktops on Azure is that you don't need to worry about it. You jump straight into, hey, I want to configure my desktop for people to use. I want to install those applications. Uh, you have some decisions to make and some testing to do to identify how much density and which size of machines are more appropriate, and define scaling policies. Do I want my pool to grow as people join? Do I want to provision X machines as certain capacity is there? So those are kind of the decisions you make. And one of the cool things about Azure Virtual Desktop is really the total flexibility. So one ask that VDI implementers, users, right, architects always had was, hey, Microsoft, you have a Windows Server multi-session, but if I want to give a Windows 10, 11 machine to users, it's kind of a one-to-one relationship, right? You can't have a one powerful resource intense machine and have multiple users connected and share sessions. Well, that's one of the things that Microsoft introduced as part of Azure Virtual Desktop is a Windows 10 or 11 multi-session. And I believe that's still the only platform you can use that. So you can have a feature-rich, good application compatibility machine with a lot of resources on it where multiple users can connect. So basically, you can do the remote desktop approach, right? The RDS approach, but to a Windows client. I still consider VDI to be kind of a one-to-one relationship with the device, even if it's pulled. And also support the traditional multi-session servers as well. So it supports the three scenarios, the dedicated one-to-one machine. So you have one Windows 10 or 11 machine dedicated to a user or a pooled number of machines dedicated to a group of users. You also have the Windows 10 or 11 multi-session, where multiple users connect to one device and use sessions on it. And you also have the traditional RDS, where you have a server multi-session, where people connect. There's good reasons why you should one or another. There's density, cost, sizing, user experience, but also application compatibility. All those things should be taken into consideration. So now recapping what's available, you have a dedicated VDI model machine. So you have one Windows 10 or 11 machine dedicated to a user. You have the dedicated RDS model where users get their own RDS. They have the pooled VDI model where you have a lot of single instance Windows 10 and 11 devices. You have pooled Windows 11 machines. And you also have something that was introduced in RDS, which is a remote application. So when connecting to that environment, we've till now have only been talking about clicking somewhere or connecting and getting a full desktop for you to work. What remote app allows you to do is to publish a single application, right? So for example, you can get Champ Control Center or Tableau or Visual Studio. So the same way you can have the PC virtual lab here, that if you clicked on that, it would get a full screen OS, right, to work with the start menu and everything else. If you click on any of the other applications, you would see a pop-up of a window that looks just an application running on your own desktop, but that's actually running on a virtual desktop or RDS on the background. So it's a quite cool way to deliver applications. So if you need to provide users a full desktop for them to be productive. So use cases for that would be, hey, I need Outlook, I need Teams, and I need Word for people to collaborate across multiple sessions because they're connecting from home, and I want to provide all the tool set in a secured, controlled environment. That's a great use of the full desktop. But if you have an application that is targeted as a specific department or subset of users, and you want to publish just that for people to access from wherever they are, that's also an option. So you can probably have more density per server. So it's really, there's some strategic decisions to be made for each of the scenarios. Another cool innovation here is good. So now I can have high density of users on powerful machines. I don't want to create a lot of host pools with a lot of dedicated, images, right? I don't want to have an image for the sales guys with the sales apps and another one for the marketing, and the finance guys only have one application different. Can I have a generic image and based on group membership, right? Which department they are, they get the additional applications. So in a traditional on-premise environment, right? You would have something like Intune or Configuration Manager deploying the additional applications to the users. So for example, you have a generic Windows 11 machine that you deploy to every laptop. And if I'm David from the marketing department and I log into that machine, Intune and SCCM would say, hey, you're a marketing user. Marketing users need those 3 applications. Or if I'm in sales, I need HubSpot and something else for quotes or to process invoices. Those applications would get installed. They created MSIX app attach as a way to mitigate that because you don't want multiple images. You don't want to create a host pool per department. You don't want multiple images. So what you could do is get the yellow bit, all the common applications installed. User profiles can also be containerized using FS logics. So it doesn't matter where you connect, your profile follows you inside that environment. But what MSIX app attach does is if you are a sales user, the 2 sales applications would get attached to that session you're using. So the applications would show up as if they were installed, but they're actually kind of mapped, attached to that device. So they show up as an application ready to use, but it's not really installed to that session. It's attached to that session, which is a very interesting concept. So you can have a generic image deployed to everyone, and depending on group membership, you can get the appropriate applications attached to your session and be able to use them. This is really, really powerful, a very good way to manage a potentially diverse environment. And that will cover a lot of the, smaller, more niche departments, right? So instead of having a full image for something that 3 or 4 people use, that's a good way to architect the solution. So here's an example, right? You would have the app attach assets, right? The VHTX, VHT, sitting on a file server, and then there's some architecting and configuration you do on AVD. And then as the user logs in, it will identify the session host where the user is, and it will get, the different applications mapped to the right user. Very simple concept, very simple implementation as well. You just need to package the applications to be compatible with that with MSIX format. We've been talking about Azure Virtual Desktop. There is, however, a very similar offering from Microsoft. It's called Windows 365. And the difference between Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365, in a nutshell, is Azure Virtual Desktop. It's more, even though it has the main components managed by Microsoft, you have a lot of flexibility and configuration on them. You can choose density, resources, and a lot of policies, and it sits on Azure. You also have Windows 365, which sits alongside Microsoft 365, right? The Office 365 queues, and the way it's licensed is per user per month. So AVD, you're paying for the resources you are consuming. So you're paying a little bit for the network utilization, you're paying a little bit for the storage, and you're paying for the compute to choose. So depending on the density or how many dedicated machines, how many you decide to keep on standby, and how you grow and contract the machines as you use, all those get the Azure cloud model for billing, right, on kind of uptime. Windows 365 is a very different concept. It's a dedicated virtual machine, and you pay per user per month. So there's a few different use cases. So the first use case for Windows 365 is if you don't have a very skilled, complete, I think, infrastructure team or IT team, that might be a good way to start to provision machines per user. There's a predictable cost, very low risk, and it might be a good way to start. So for example, if you're a small organization and you need to collaborate with external people, but you want them to be inside your tenant with your rules and with your tools, you can quickly provision those and give them access inside your tenant with your own rules, your own policies. Where AVD is probably a better solution, especially cost-wise, at scale. And when you have multiple different requirements like different images and so on. So by default, Windows 365 comes with just an empty Windows 10 or 11 or Windows 10 or 11 with Microsoft Office. You can customize the image a little bit, but it's meant to be kind of a gateway to your Microsoft 365 environment. You can manage both Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop with Microsoft Intune. So to keep it up to date, to distribute applications, to make some applications available on the App Store, company portal. So you have to make some decisions, right? Do you want it as a service? Do you want it, it to be easy management, not worry about storage, compute, or how much is it going to cost? I don't want to be doing a lot of sizing. So you can just choose, hey, I want a machine for people to connect and be able to work. Both AVD and Windows 365 are optimized for the Microsoft solution. So if you're connecting it, from your home, I think now I would say a decent internet connectivity is a given. But it's been optimized for use for applications such as Microsoft Teams. So you can easily, leverage some of your local hardware capabilities, but still be able to use a remote session. It has a lot of optimization as well on, the connection between you and the final destination machine. So there's always a lot of improvement. It is a very robust solution. So here's an example of a Windows 365. I'll actually connect to that machine as one of the demos. And as you can see, there is a kind of remote connection tab here. I've been presenting this from an AVD session with a physical clicker in my hand that's connected to my machine here. So I'm presenting from a cloud machine with local hardware, local audio, video, and USB devices. and it works as expected. Both solutions, Windows 365 and AVD, will detect how many monitors you have and span across all of them. So when I'm at the office at home, I use 3 very large screens, and immediately detects, and I get 3 large screens to work from. So it is a full, complete, developed solution to enable productivity. Another use, right? There you go. Another use case for AVD and Windows 365 both is if you're a company, you have a very dispersed workforce. You can get, not only contractors in, but instead of giving every person a device, if they already have their own device and, you don't want to ship another device, oh, I have my own Mac, I want to work with my own Mac, great. Give them a Windows 365 session. Everything that's more, needs to be more secure. And if there's specific tools they need to access on a secure environment, you can provide AVD as the gateway to that. And still leverages the full power of all the monitors and hardware that they have at home. So Windows 365 is simple implementation. So in this case, you can see here that this all I did to get this was to create a couple of provisioning policies on the Microsoft 365 side, not Azure, Microsoft 365. And when I license, I specify how much power I want of this machine, right? So this one is a quite powerful one that we have. It's an 8 vCPU, 32 gig, and 512, 32 gig of RAM and 512 gig of disk space. That's a dedicated machine to me. And as you can see, the left connection was 5 months ago. That's a screenshot I took before this presentation. I've been paying for this for 5 months without using, and that's because I still use it for demos sometimes. Other people in the organization use that as well. And AVD kind of became our default. But simple implementation, once you create a couple of provisioning policies, once you license and assign that license to my user, it takes a few minutes to provision, and it will show up on windows365.microsoft.com. It will show the devices that are available to me, but also if I click on the menu here at the top, it will show me that I have a Windows 365 machine available. So it's fully integrated with the Microsoft Office 365 environment. It's very quick provisioning and fixed price per user per month, so you know exactly what the cost is. And as I mentioned, you can do in-tune management on both AVD and Windows 365. How do you access, right? So how do I access Windows 365 and AVD? So the recommended method is what we call the Windows app, right? Which is the one on the left. The Windows app will list all the sessions you have available, but that's also available via the web, right? So any modern browser that supports HTML5, you'll be able to connect. You will get a list of what's available, and once you click on it, you get a full desktop. So even on the browser, you can maximize and get a full screen to work from. So you don't even need anything installed on the device. So before I jump into where to start, I am going to show you the different ones. So this is the Windows app with my AVD session. This is the one I'm actually connected to where I've been presenting, right? So if I minimize this, right, you can see it's a full desktop. It has the remote connection tab here. I can put on a window, so you see it's real, right? It's a window. It's a remote connection to, let me see if I can track this. To a session desktop. It has all the applications I need to work, including the presentation I've been presenting, and it's a fully functional and responsive Windows 11. And if I had remote applications published, they would show up in here. So when I click, I would get the remote application. You can also access it through the web. So in this case, for this demo, I will show a connection to a Windows 365 machine. And for the Windows 365 machine, because it's almost like a dedicated hardware, I have a few more options here. I can, for example, restart, rename, spec connection. So I could force a restart here. And if I connect to it, right, I have the typical prompts for remote connection. Do I want to map the printers? Do I want to allow file transfer? Am I connecting the microphone, clipboard, camera? Do I allow my location and keyboard shortcuts? I can save that, right? If I click on don't show again, and it will start a remote connection to that machine. Because it didn't connect to this one, it might need to wake up the machine. Good. Machine is starting. As I mentioned, this one is not the Azure Virtual Desktop that I was presenting from. This is the Windows 365 device. And this is through the web, right? Just to remind, even though I was looking full screen, I am connected from a web browser. And it's pretty incredible, the level of functionality, even if it's not in full screen, it's a fully functional desktop. We'll get there. And if I use this more often, right, I think they probably have a logic behind on how often you use it and how quickly the machine comes up. So ask you to authenticate. There you go. I'm inside the browser. I can start allowing things. I can enter full screen. I can allow them to know where I am. Allowing it knowing where I am, adjust the clock to local time. It can try to define kind of what keyboard layout and so on. So it's a fully functional desktop machine. So going back more to the AVD side, after exploring a little bit Windows 365, the infrastructure on Azure to run it, it's up to you to configure. There is no fixed price per month per user. It really depends on what users you are deploying, how many machines are on or off, how you manage capacity to add and remove people. So there's there's more flexibility. And how do you start with AVD? So Microsoft Learn, right, the official documentation is usually the first place you go to. They have good documentation. They don't have a proper kind of learning track specific for Azure Virtual Desktop, but there's definitely a lot of very good resources out there. If we're talking about Azure Virtual Desktop, you will hear about Nerdio a lot. So Nerdio is a company that developed a lot of extended functionality for AVD. And Nerdio has this very interesting culture where they believe training their platform and the surrounding technology, so Azure and AVD, should be free. So they run a lot of in-person sessions to teach how to use their solution, which is an AVD management solution. But they teach, the basics of AVD. So it's worth looking on their webpage when they're running those, because they will teach AVD, how to provision it. You also get to learn what they do on top of it. They're focused on cost savings and manage and reporting on the density, how to improve density, how to get, deprovision machines or reduce the cost and load on your Azure infrastructure. They also help implement things like FS Logics, which is the profile management part, in an easier way. And the course I used to get certified on AVD, and I strongly recommend to people, is the course Zero to Hero for Windows Virtual Desktop. So Azure Virtual Desktop used to be called Windows Virtual Desktop. The course is constantly updated. It's by a guy called Travis Roberts, which is probably the best AVD instructor out there. I believe he now works for Nerdio as well. Right? Nerdio, again, believing that education on those things should be free. Have been hiring a lot of good trainers on that space. So those are the three resources I recommend to get started. Thanks for bearing with me as we explored and did some work to understand AVD. I will see if people have any questions.